The space race. During the Cold War, both America and the USSR decided rocket research was important. In 1955, both countries announced that they were going to launch a satellite into orbit. The USSR took America's announcement as a challenge and went as far as to establish a commission whose entire goal was to beat America in putting a satellite into orbit. Both recruited top rocket scientists from Germany to assist them in their research, and were soon making great progress in rocket technology. On October 4, 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik 1. This action caused America to realize that the Soviet Union was ahead of them in technology that could be used not only for space travel, but also for military use. In addition, it showed what country had the better science, technology, and economic system. America launched their first successful satellite Explorer 1 4 months later, yet the Soviets had already taken the lead in the race. On April 12, 1961, the Soviet Union launched the spacecraft Vostok 1. On board was Yuri Gagarin, who became the first human to orbit the Earth. Upon re-entry, two sections of the spacecraft failed to separate properly and caused the craft to gyrate for 10 minutes until the wires holding the two sections of the craft together burnt up, releasing the descent module of Vostok. Many did not think Gagarin would survive. However, he landed safely in a farmer's field in the Saratov region of Russia. 4 months later, in August 1961, German Titov piloted Vostok 2 for over a day in order to test the effects of weightlessness on the human body. While over America, Titov broadcast a hello message to the American people who would not send a man into orbit for another year. Despite the Vostok 2 facing the same issues as the Vostok 1, the Soviet Union followed up with 4 more missions, adding up to Vostok 6 by June 1963. 3 weeks after Gagarin went into space, America launched the Freedom 7, and Alan Shepard became the first American into space. However, Shepard did not orbit the Earth. Despite not being the first American to orbit the Earth, Shepard became the first man to return to Earth with his ship, as the Soviet cosmonauts parachuted from their ships during the landing. A year later, on February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth on the spacecraft Friendship 7. All of this was part of what was known as Project Mercury, created by NASA. The purpose of Project Mercury was to determine if man could survive in space and to put a man into orbit around the Earth. This was accomplished. However, the Soviet Union beat America into orbit. Americans were embarrassed by being beaten twice by the Soviet Union. In 1961, President Kennedy went to Congress to declare that he wanted to be the first to put a man on the moon, and the Apollo moon program was launched. Alongside the Apollo program was the Gemini program. Gemini was seen almost as an extension of Project Mercury. The Gemini project was a great success that led to many important milestones in America's space program. For example, On June 3, 1965, Ed White became the first American to perform a spacewalk. This extravehicular activity, EVA, had not been planned as part of the original mission. However, when the Soviets carried out an EVA in March 1965, the Americans wanted to show that they were not falling further behind the Soviets. By the final Gemini mission, Gemini 12, NASA had proved that spacewalks could be carried out both easily and efficiently. Project Apollo ran from 1961 to 1972 and was at first meant to carry out missions intended to orbit the Earth. However, President John F. Kennedy had a desire to land a man on the moon and bring him back safely. The Gemini program that was created to invent the technology for the Apollo spacecrafts was not completed until 1966, with the first manned Apollo mission planned for early in 1967. The program did not start off to a good start, as Apollo 1 ended in disaster on January 27, 1967. This meant that the next manned mission was not until 1968 when Apollo 7 was launched, giving NASA just over a year to reach the moon before the decade was over. Apollo 8 went on to become the first manned capsule to orbit the moon, and astronaut Jim Lovell confirmed that there is a Santa Claus on Christmas Day from his view of Earth from the lunar orbit. The Soyuz spacecraft was made in the USSR's attempt to land on the moon. During the first manned launch of a Soyuz capsule on April 23, 1967, cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov experienced many problems. The fatal problem was a faulty parachute that failed to open. The Soyuz 1 crashed at a speed of nearly 400 miles per hour and resulted in the first death of the space race. The Soviets faced many problems after this, taking 18 months to test new rockets. During the 18 months, a rocket called the N-1 was tested, and one of the tests of the rocket resulted in the largest explosion in rocket history after a failed launch. 2 weeks later, after the disaster, the crew of the Apollo 11 landed on the moon. In the summer of 1969, NASA launched Apollo 11 that carried Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. During the descent onto the moon, the mission did not go as smoothly as hoped. The lunar module's guidance computer was taking the crew towards a large crater surrounded by a field of rocks. Armstrong had to take manual control of the lunar module and guide it to safety with just 15 seconds of fuel left. Despite the issue, the moon landing was a success, and on July 21st, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to set foot on the moon. With the Gemini and the Apollo programs, the US had taken a huge lead in the space race. In July 1975, the relations between the USA and the USSR had begun to cool, and the first US-Soviet mission occurred with the Apollo-Soyuz project. The space race was now considered over,